The dead do not send signals. That was the first thought that passed through the mind of Lena Voss when the console in front of her blinked alive at 0340 station time. She had been eating a cold meal at her monitoring post, halfway through a 12-hour shift that had given her absolutely nothing to do, and she had been thinking about putting in for a transfer. Something with Windows. Something where the stars were not just numbers on a screen. Then the number on her screen stopped being a number and became something else. A beacon ping. Human-coded. Encrypted in a format that the Coalition had officially retired 8 months ago when the war ended. She sat up straight. She put her meal aside. She ran the check 3 times because she was not the kind of person who reported things she had not checked 3 times. The signal was real. It was faint, the way a voice is faint when someone is speaking from a very long distance with a cloth pressed over their mouth. But it was there, it was structured, and it was broadcasting on a frequency that only one class of soldier carried. The deep insertion units, the ones who went in behind enemy lines and were not expected to come out the same way they went in. The units the Coalition had collectively listed as unaccounted for in the official ceasefire paperwork. The ones whose families had received folded notices and not bodies. Lena filed the report at 0347. By 0412 it had been passed up 4 levels and quietly set aside. The Coalition liaison officer who received it wrote a brief note in the margin. Signal artifact from legacy equipment. Recommend archive. He had other things to do. The war was over. The paperwork of peace was enormous and exhausting, and everyone was tired in a bone-deep way that had not yet found its name. The report sat in the archive for 11 days. It was a junior analyst at Earth's listening post, a young man named DAV who had the specific combination of stubbornness and free time that makes some people dangerous in quiet offices, who found it again. He had been cross-referencing legacy beacon registries as part of a routine audit that nobody had asked him to rush. He matched the signal frequency to a registered beacon number. He matched the beacon number to a name. Sergeant Dana Reeves. Listed killed in action. Battle of Vale Prime. 14 months ago. DAV sat with that for a long time. He was 23 years old, and he had not been in the war. He had been in school. But he had grown up in a city that had a wall near the train station where names were printed in small black letters. Names of people who had gone and not come back. And he understood in a simple and direct way what a name meant. He understood that you did not put a name on a wall and then ignore a signal from that name when it called back. He escalated the report again. This time he did not send it through the Coalition channels. He sent it through the Earth military network directly, flagged urgent, addressed to the office of Admiral Soren Drath. Admiral Drath was not sleeping when the flag came through. He rarely slept well anymore. He had commanded the 7th Fleet during the final push, and the final push had cost him more than he had expected to pay and more than he had yet finished paying in the private hours of the night. He read Dav's report while standing at the window of his office, looking at the curve of Earth below the station. He read it twice. Then he called for Commander Ral Austin. Austin arrived 20 minutes later. He was a lean, unhurried man who had the particular stillness of someone who had spent years in situations where making sudden movements got people killed. He had led special operations insertions for 9 years, 4 of them during the war. He sat down across from Drath without being told to and read the report that was handed to him without a word. He read it once. That was enough. She's alive, Austin said. It was not a question. The signal is consistent with a live operator, Drath said. Not a malfunction. Not a ghost echo. Someone with her beacon, with her encryption key, pressed a transmit button. Austin set the report down on the table carefully. The Coalition knows? The Coalition filed it as noise 11 days ago. There was a silence between the 2 men. It was not an empty silence. It was full of things that both of them understood without needing to say. How many are still out there? Austin asked. Drath slid a second document across the table. It was a list. The paper was not long, but the names were printed small because there were a lot of them. Austin looked at it without picking it up. His jaw tightened once and then settled. The ceasefire agreement does not cover active recovery operations, Drath said. Technically, the language is about military incursion. A small team, no fleet assets, moving through neutral transit corridors. That is not explicitly prohibited. That is an interesting reading of the agreement. It is the reading I intend to use. Austin looked up from the list. You're authorizing this. I'm having a private conversation with one of my officers about a signal that the Coalition has already dismissed. Officially, nothing has been authorized. Unofficially, Draft paused. He looked out the window again. I have a list. I have a signal. I have a name that is supposed to be on a wall. And I am not in the business of leaving my people in the dark. Austin nodded slowly. I'll need volunteers. Small team. 6 people, no more. I'll need you to understand that if this goes badly, I cannot stand behind you in any official capacity. Understood. And I need you to understand something else. Drath turned from the window. His voice did not change in volume, but it changed in weight. This is not a rescue for one soldier. There are 159 names on that list. Whatever you find out there, whatever you learn about where they are being held, what facilities, what conditions, you bring that back. We are not doing this once. We are doing this until the list is empty. Austin stood. He picked up the list this time. He folded it carefully and put it in his chest pocket, close to where his heart was. I'll start pulling names tonight, he said. Volunteers only. Every hand you ask will say yes, Drath said quietly. They all have someone on that list. Austin left. The door closed behind him. Drath stayed at the window a while longer, looking down at the planet below, at the cities full of families who had been told to grieve and move on, and who had done their best to obey. Down in the lower decks, Lena Voss was finishing her shift. She did not know that her report had been found again, or what it had set in motion. She clocked out, walked to the transit bay, and took the shuttle home. She thought about the signal one more time before she slept. The dead do not send signals. Which meant Dana Reeves was not dead. Which meant someone had to go and get her. Somewhere in the dark between stars, very far away, a beacon pulsed once more into the silence and waited. The ship had no name on its hull. That was intentional. It was a mid-range cargo hauler that had been quietly borrowed from a private contractor with ties to Earth's Intelligence Directorate, stripped of its Coalition transponder codes, and given forged Vreth commercial freight registration that had cost more favors than Austin cared to count. From the outside, it looked like exactly the kind of vessel that moved cheap industrial goods through the post-war neutral corridors. Battered, unremarkable, and not worth stopping. There were 6 people aboard. Austin had asked for volunteers, and Drath had been right. Every person he contacted had said yes before he finished the sentence. He had picked carefully anyway. He wanted people who were steady, not just willing. Willing was easy. Steady was the thing that kept you alive when the plan stopped working. His second was a woman named Petra, who had been a signals intelligence specialist during the war and who could read Vrethcom traffic the way other people read a menu. Beside her was a field medic called Seb, quiet and precise, and the kind of person who could stitch a wound in the dark without asking the patient to hold still twice. The others were Rook, a former demolitions expert who had retrained in non-lethal entry methods after the ceasefire. Ade, a former Vreth border scout who had defected 3 years into the war and now knew the patrol rhythms of the enemy's frontier better than most Vreth commanders did. And the youngest of them, a specialist named Eno Ferris, 26 years old, whose file listed him as exceptionally resourceful and whose actual talent was an almost supernatural ability to find exits in rooms. That did not appear to have any. Ferris had also asked, before they launched, whether there was any chance the rations on this mission would be better than last time. Nobody had answered him. That was, he noted, also an answer. They crossed into Vreth territory through a corridor that officially did not exist. A gap in the post-war sensor grid that Ade had mapped personally, a narrow channel between 2 decommissioned relay satellites that the Vreth had shut down to cut costs after the war ended. It took 4 hours of near-silent running to pass through, engines at minimum output, nobody speaking above a whisper even though sound did not travel in space, and whispering made no practical difference. It was instinct. When you were somewhere you should not be, you became quiet in every way you could. They came out the other side into the dead stretch of Vreth border territory. Old battlefields, wrecked hulls of ships from both sides drifting in loose clusters, still turning slowly the way things do when nothing has stopped them. The light here had a particular quality, thin and gray, filtered through dust that had been debris not long ago. Rook looked out the port window at a ship carcass that still had readable markings on its side and said nothing for a long time. Coalition registry, Petra said, without looking up from her console. Transport class. Went down in the 3rd month of the war. How many aboard? Eno asked. 240, standard crew. No one said anything after that. They were 2 days out from the coordinates of Dana Reeves' signal when Ade picked up the Vreth patrol. It was not a checkpoint. It was a roving border unit. 3 small military craft moving in a sweep pattern that was not supposed to cover this area according to any intelligence Austin had. It covered this area. Change in patrol protocols, Ade said, his voice flat and professional. Post-war adjustment. They've been expanding the sweep radius. Can we go around them? Austin asked. Not without adding 18 hours to the route. How close is the signal location? 31 hours at current speed. Austin looked at the patrol craft on the screen. 3 ships, well armed for peacetime border work. His own ship had nothing that could be called a weapon. That had been a deliberate choice. A cargo hauler with weapons was no longer a cargo hauler. We go through the wreck field, Austin said. Ade turned and looked at him. That field has been shifting since the battle. There are gaps in the debris maps. There are also gaps in the patrol's sensor range. A large metal field scatters their readings. Austin was already moving to the navigation console. We thread through, slow and careful, come out the far side behind their sweep window. If we clip anything in there, we won't. Ade studied him for a moment. Then he nodded and began calculating the route. What followed was 40 minutes that none of them spoke about in much detail afterward. The wreck field was dense in a way that the old maps did not fully capture. Ships broken into sections, each section trailing smaller pieces, cables and hull plates, and things that had no longer any recognizable shape, drifting in loose orbits around each other. Austin flew manually. He was not the best pilot on the team, but he was the best at keeping his hands steady when everything around him was wrong, and that was what the next 40 minutes required. Eno sat behind him and did not make a single joke. That was how the rest of the team knew how serious it was. They came out the far side 12 meters clear of a drifting engine block the size of a small house. The patrol was behind them, its sweep moving in the opposite direction. Petra confirmed the sensor blind spot had held. Nobody said a word for almost a full minute. Good flying, Seb said finally, which was the most enthusiastic thing Seb had ever said about anything. 19 hours later, they reached the coordinates. There was nothing there, not visibly, just flat terrain on a rocky moon that the charts listed as uninhabited, uninhabitable, and geologically unremarkable. Eno pointed out that the charts were clearly wrong on at least the first count because there was a very deliberate power signature coming from beneath the surface, and when Petra triangulated it against the geology maps, she found a series of sealed tunnels running under the rock that did not appear on any official survey. An underground facility, not on any coalition intelligence record, not on any Vreth map they had obtained through the war, built quietly, after the ceasefire, or possibly before it in the expectation of one. Rook pulled up the thermal imaging. Ade overlaid the patrol data. Petra identified the comm patterns. Austin stood behind them and listened while they each reported what they found. And with every piece of information, the picture became clearer and worse. The facility was real. It was guarded. And through the imaging, through the heat signatures of bodies in enclosed spaces, they counted the outlines of 11 people in a holding area deep in the rock. Austin checked the missing list in his pocket. He had it memorized. He did not need to take it out. He checked the names anyway, because the names deserved to be checked. Every face that the thermal imaging could suggest matched a name on the list. 11 soldiers. Alive. Underground. Behind a guard detail that his 6-person team could not neutralize without alerting the wider patrol network, without risking the lives of the very people they had come to recover, without turning a quiet extraction into something that the coalition would not be able to call anything other than a military incursion. So Austin did the hardest thing he had done since crossing the border. He ordered the team to mark the location, record everything, and withdraw. Not because they were giving up. That thought did not enter his mind or anyone else's, and if it had, it would not have survived contact with the silence in that cockpit. He ordered the withdrawal because they were coming back with a real plan. And when they came back, they were not leaving until every last one of those 11 people was on this ship. Eno, as they turned and began the route home, looked out the window at the moon below. 11 people down there, in the rock, in the dark. They don't know we found them, he said quietly. No, Austin said. But we did. Yes. Eno turned back to face forward. He said nothing more. He did not need to. They had found them. And in the entire long history of human conflict, finding someone was always step one of bringing them home. Dana Reeves had been counting for 481 days. Not counting down. There was nothing to count down toward. She was counting up. Every morning when the ventilation in the tunnel changed its cycle, a low mechanical hum that marked the shift from night temperature to day temperature, the only reliable clock she had. She scratched a small mark on the inside of her left boot with the edge of a loosened bolt. She had worked free from the bunk frame in her 3rd week of captivity. She had run out of space on the boot. She had moved to the floor under the bunk. She had run out of space there too. She was not doing it to remember the time. She was doing it so that the time could not make her forget herself. The Vreth did not understand this. They were not cruel captors in any theatrical sense. They fed their prisoners on a regular schedule, kept the tunnels at livable temperature, and did not conduct what could formally be called interrogations anymore. Not since the ceasefire, when the information their prisoners carried had become strategically irrelevant. What they did was simpler and in some ways harder. They simply waited. They let the weeks pile up. They let the silence and the sameness and the unchanging stone walls do the slow work that violence was too blunt to accomplish. It did not work on the humans. Dana was not sure why exactly. She thought about it sometimes in the long hours when there was nothing else to think about. She decided it had something to do with the particular way humans related to each other even when they could not see each other. The 11 of them were spread across 4 cells, but they had spent the first month developing a knock code against the walls, and then a more sophisticated system using the water pipes, and they had maintained it every day since. Not because they had critical information to pass. Mostly they passed ordinary things. One of them, a big quiet soldier named Pole, told terrible jokes in knock code every night before sleep. Another, a woman named Cass, had been recounting the entire plot of a book she had read before the war, chapter by chapter, installment by installment, and was currently somewhere in the middle and showed no sign of stopping. It kept them people. That was all it did. That was everything it did. Dana had also been cataloging. She had a memory that had always been better than average, and she put it to use. Guard rotation schedules, shift change times, the sound of boots on stone, how many, which direction, how fast, the pattern of the ventilation, the weight of the food trays that told you whether it was being prepared in a hurry or with attention. She stored all of it in the organized rooms of her mind, kept current, kept updated. She did not know when someone would come for her. She knew that someone would. She was going to be ready. On the 481st day, she sent her second beacon ping. She had rationed the power carefully, conserved the charge for exactly this. The first ping had gone out 8 months ago and had received no response that she could detect. She had allowed herself 2 doubts about that. 2 days of quietly wondering whether she was wrong, whether no one was coming, whether the war was over in every sense including hers. Then she had done what she always did with doubts. She put them in a small mental room, closed the door firmly, and went back to work. She pressed the transmit key. The beacon pulsed. The signal went up through the rock, through the moon's thin shell of almost atmosphere, and out into space. She had no way of knowing that Austin's ship had just crossed back into neutral territory, carrying everything it had learned about this facility. She had no way of knowing that her first ping had already found its way to Admiral Drath's desk and set everything in motion. She put the beacon away, lay back on her bunk, and listened to Pole knock out the setup for a joke about a Vreth customs inspector and a crate of unlicensed nutrient paste. It was, she thought, probably going to be a terrible joke. She waited for the punchline anyway. Meanwhile, 20 light years away in the direction of warmer stars, Admiral Drath was standing in front of a council room full of alien faces and explaining, without any particular apology, what the human military had been doing in Vreth space. The council chamber of the Allied Coalition was a large, circular room designed to convey neutrality. Every seat was the same height. Every screen was the same size. The architecture said that everyone here was equal. The expressions on the alien faces around the room said that they were deeply unimpressed by what they were hearing. Delegate Oravel, the senior coalition diplomat and the person most responsible for the ceasefire agreement, spoke first when Drath finished. She was from a species called the Run, tall and narrow, with a translator implant that rendered her voice into a dry, precise tone that gave every sentence the feeling of a formal objection. "You sent a military team into Vreth territory," she said, "without council authorization, during an active ceasefire." "I sent 6 people in a cargo ship," Drath said. "The legal distinction is not as meaningful as your tone implies. We found 11 of our soldiers alive in an underground facility that the Vreth did not disclose during ceasefire negotiations. I would suggest that disclosure might have been required." There was a brief pause. The Rin delegate's face did not change. The facility in question may have been an administrative oversight. The 11 people inside it are not an administrative oversight. Drath reached into his coat. He took out a document and set it on the table. He slid it forward. Nobody moved to pick it up. "That is the full missing persons registry for human military personnel. 159 names. We have confirmed 11 of them alive in one facility. The signal that started this operation came from a soldier who has been held for over 14 months after being declared dead." He left his hand on the document for a moment. "I understand the argument you are making, Delegate. I am telling you that from where I stand, the word handful is not one I am able to use for this list." The room was quiet. Different species handled silence differently. The Rin stood it very well. The Gurith, broad and armored, shifted in their seats with low sounds. A Pellan observer in the far corner made no movement at all. "If you proceed," Vel said finally, "and the Vreth interpret this as a military incursion, the ceasefire fails." "If we do not proceed," Drath said, 148 people spend the rest of their lives in a hole in the ground because it was diplomatically inconvenient to get them out." He picked up the document. He put it back in his coat. "I came here as a courtesy. I wanted the council to know what we are doing and why. I did not come here to ask permission." He left before the vote was called. He already knew what the vote would be. It did not change anything. Back on the ship, heading home through the neutral corridor, Austin received Drath's brief message. He read it once. Then he called his team together in the small cargo bay that served as their common room. "The council is opposed," he said. "The admiral is not stopping. We're going back, this time with a real plan. 2 facilities, coordinated, simultaneous extraction. 12 targets total." The team looked at him. Nobody asked whether they had a choice. They already knew the answer to that. "When do we leave?" Eno asked. 2 weeks. The plan has to be airtight. And then we get all 12? Austin looked at him. He thought about Dana Reeves in the dark, counting marks on the floor of her boot. He thought about 11 names that had already been crossed off a list as dead. He thought about 148 more. "We get all 12, he said, "and then we go back for the rest." That night, Eno lay in his bunk and stared at the ceiling of the ship. He had volunteered for this without really knowing what it would feel like. He knew now. It did not feel heroic. It felt like a very specific and practical kind of love, the kind that showed up with tools and a plan and did not leave until the job was finished. He fell asleep thinking about Pole's terrible jokes. He hoped Pole was still telling them. He was. He told them every night. He would tell them until someone came. And someone was coming. 2 weeks became 3. 3 because the secondary facility proved harder to map than expected, and Austin was not the kind of man who moved before the plan was ready. The plan, when it was finally ready, was 12 pages long. Austin had memorized every page. So had every person on his team. They had drilled the entry sequences until the movements were in their hands, not just their heads. They had rehearsed the contingencies. What if the guard count was different? What if the access tunnels had been sealed? What if one of the prisoners could not walk on their own? They had an answer for every version of wrong they could imagine. They also knew that the one version of wrong they could never imagine was the version that would actually happen. This was not something they said aloud. They all knew it. They packed extra medical supplies, extra rations, extra extraction cord, and did not discuss why. There were 2 ships this time. Austin's original cargo hauler, which had been returned, reforged, and refueled, and a second vessel, slightly smaller, crewed by a 4-person support team who would hold position at the extraction rendezvous and be ready to receive people who might be injured, malnourished, or in states that required immediate care. Seb would split his time between the ground and the ship. That had taken the most time to plan and the most argument, because Seb did not like being anywhere that was not directly useful, and eventually Austin told him that the extraction rendezvous was where he would be most useful, and Seb had accepted this with the particular expression of a man who accepted things he disagreed with for practical reasons. They crossed into Vreth space through the same gap Ade had found before. The gap was still there. The patrol patterns had shifted again, this time in a way that Ade said suggested the Vreth had noticed something in the sector but had not pinpointed what. This was not good news. It was also not a reason to stop. They split up 6 hours out. Austin, Petra, Ade, and Eno took the primary facility, Dana's location. Rook and a specialist named Ren, borrowed from a second extraction team that had been training quietly on the station, took the secondary site 700 kilometers north along the moon's surface. Both teams would move at the same time, same window, in and out in under 40 minutes. If either team ran past the 40-minute mark, the extraction rendezvous would wait an additional 20 before withdrawing. They did not talk about what happened if it took longer than 60 minutes. Austin's team reached the primary facility access point at the agreed time. The entry was a maintenance hatch that Petra had identified from the thermal imaging, not guarded, because it was not on any official schematic of the facility, which meant either it was a construction oversight or the Vreth had simply decided that a moon with no atmosphere and no local population did not require exhaustive perimeter security. Either way, it was there, and it was open, and they moved through it without a sound. The tunnels below were exactly as the imaging had suggested. Stone walls with metal lining, functional lighting, the sound of ventilation moving air from somewhere deeper. The facility smelled of mineral dust and processed food, and the particular staleness of sealed spaces. Austin had been in places that smelled like this before, during the war, doing extractions of a different kind in a different context. The smell was the same. The feeling of moving through it was the same. That specific attention that is not quite fear, that state where every sense is tuned to maximum, and your body is deciding things faster than your mind. Ade led. He knew the patrol schedules from the surveillance data. He moved them through 2 junctions without contact, pressing them into a side passage once when a single guard walked a route that was 2 minutes early. The guard passed. They moved again. They found the cell block at the 19-minute mark. It was a plain door, heavy, sealed, with a basic electronic lock that Petra had already cracked the code for based on the facility's comm patterns. She pressed the sequence. The door opened. The smell that came out was different from the tunnel. Closer. Human. 12 human beings in a rock-walled space that was too small for 12 human beings, and they had been in it for a very long time. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then Dana Reeves, sitting on the far bunk with her boots on, and her eyes immediately alert in the way of someone who had been ready for this exact moment for months, said one word. Count. She was already standing, already moving to the door, already counting heads as her fellow prisoners rose from bunks and floor and wall. She counted to 11. She looked at Austin. Who are you? Commander Ral Austin. We're getting you out. She looked him over in a way that was extremely fast and extremely thorough. Then she turned to the room. On your feet. Everyone who can move, move. Pull. Take Cass. She's been on that ankle for a week. A large man with a quiet face moved to help a smaller woman who was favoring her left side. Dana looked back at Austin. Which way? Back the way we came. We have 19 minutes. 18 and 40. Petra corrected from the doorway. Move, Austin said. They moved. The 11 prisoners moved faster and more quietly than Austin had allowed himself to hope. They were weak. He could see it in the way some of them held the wall. But they were organized, they were controlled, and not a single one of them stopped to ask questions or look back. Dana moved at the rear, keeping count, her eyes sweeping the corridor in exactly the way a trained soldier's eyes sweep a corridor. At the second junction, the guard who was 2 minutes early was 4 minutes early this time. Contact. Brief, close, unavoidable. Austin handled it without weapons, the kind of handling that left a person breathing and unconscious on the floor of a side passage with no ability to raise an alarm for the next several minutes. It cost them 90 seconds. They ran the last stretch to the maintenance hatch. 36 minutes from entry. They came out onto the surface of the moon and into the thin dark, and the extraction ship was there because the extraction ship was always going to be there. Seb was at the ramp before they reached it, already assessing, already moving to the woman with the ankle. 11, Dana said as she came up the ramp last. She was counting still. She would not stop counting until she had a final number in her hand. 12, Petra said. Rook's team confirmed a minute ago. Secondary sight is clear. Dana stopped moving for exactly 1 second. Then she stepped fully into the ship and the ramp came up behind her. Far below in the rock, Warden Greth reached the primary facility 6 minutes after the humans had left. He walked through the empty cell block. He looked at the bunks, the marks on the walls, the water pipes with their faint scratches that he had never managed to decode. He stood in the silence for a long time. His communications officer appeared in the doorway and began reporting patrol vectors, response times, request for protocol on cross-sector pursuit. Greth listened. Then he told the officer to stand the patrol down. The officer was surprised. Sir, the humans are gone. Greth walked to the nearest bunk and looked at the small scratches on the wall. They were organized, deliberate. They were a record of something he did not fully understand. He thought about the psychological reports he had filed over the past 14 months. The humans who had not deteriorated. The humans who had organized themselves in the dark. The humans who had waited, with evident and total confidence, for exactly this. He went to his office. He sat down. He wrote a single paragraph in his official log and submitted it to Dominion Command without further comment. It read, Facility 7 has been vacated by human forces. Entry was non-destructive. Personnel neutralized temporarily with no fatalities. Prisoners extracted in full. Time from entry to exit, approximately 36 minutes. I recommend Command give serious consideration to the following observation. These humans knew their people were here. They came back for them. They were not deterred by distance, ceasefire agreements, patrol upgrades, or the formal position of their own allied council. They came back. This was not a rescue. This was a policy. On the ship, accelerating hard toward the neutral corridor, Austin sat across from Dana. She was drinking water. She was looking at nothing in particular. She had the look of someone who had just stepped from a very long and very dark hallway into a room with windows and was adjusting. How many are still on the list? She asked. Austin did not hesitate. After today, 147. She nodded slowly. She set down the water. She looked at him with the specific clarity of someone who had spent 14 months in a rock cell sharpening their mind against boredom and silence and had come out the other side with something harder than when they went in. When do we go back? She asked. Austin almost smiled. As soon as we refuel. She nodded again. That was enough. She leaned her head back against the hull of the ship and closed her eyes. And in 30 seconds she was asleep, because she had been waiting for over a year to sleep somewhere safe, and she was not going to waste the opportunity. The ship pushed through the dark toward home. Behind it, the moon turned slowly into nothing, its facility empty and its tunnels quiet, and the scratches on the wall stayed where Dana had put them, a record of 481 days of waiting, now finished. Every name on the missing list was a person who had made marks on a wall somewhere. Austin was going to find every wall. Nobody organized the crowd at the docking port. That was the thing that stayed with Delegate Oravel afterward. Not the size of it, not the noise of it, but the fact that it had no origin. There was no announcement, no organized gathering, no notice sent through any official channel. The news of the returned soldiers had moved through the station the way water moves through dry ground, finding every crack and filling it. And by the time the recovery ship docked, there were 300 people in the bay and more in the corridors behind them. Station workers, off-duty military personnel, civilians in transit who had simply stopped moving when they heard. Vel stood at the observation window above the bay and watched the ramp come down. The 12 soldiers walked out into the light slowly and without drama. They did not look like people in a moment of triumph. They looked like people who had been somewhere very hard for a very long time and had now arrived somewhere warm and were still adjusting to the warmth. Some of them squinted. One of them stopped at the bottom of the ramp and stood still for a moment, simply standing in the open air of the bay, breathing it. The crowd was quiet in a way that crowds rarely manage, the particular silence that happens when feeling is too large for any sound to contain it. Then someone near the back started clapping, not in an organized way, just clapping, the way a person does when they cannot think of anything else to do. And the clapping spread, and then the noise came, and the 12 soldiers stood in it with the careful, slightly overwhelmed expressions of people not used to being looked at. Belle watched. She did not speak. She filed a report later that simply noted the event had occurred, and kept the details minimal because she was not ready to put into formal language what it had made her feel. Drath did not watch the arrival. He was already in the council chamber, standing before the full assembly, delivering what could technically be called an account of his actions and was functionally a declaration of intent. He had brought two things with him: the original missing persons registry, which he placed on the table at the start of the session and left there, and a second document, updated as of that morning, which showed the names crossed off against the 12 returned. 147, he said. That is how many human military personnel remain unaccounted for in Vreth-controlled space. They are not abstractions. They are not statistics. I can name each of them: rank, unit, last known position, and the date they were removed from active status. I have done this. My office has done this. We will continue doing this for as long as necessary. Delegate Vel, back from the observation window and now in her seat at the council table, looked at him across the room. Admiral, the Vreth have filed a formal objection. They are characterizing the operation as a military incursion in violation of the ceasefire. If they choose to. I know what they can choose to do, Drath said. And I know what we will choose to do regardless. You cannot prioritize 147 individuals over the stability of a peace that protects billions. Drath was quiet for a moment. This was not the quiet of someone thinking of what to say. It was the quiet of someone deciding whether the thing they were about to say was worth saying. Delegate Vel, he said finally. Every species at this table has lost soldiers in this war. I understand that. And I am telling you that each of the species at this table has also, in their own way, decided that those losses were a cost that had been paid and that the account was closed. I am telling you that for humans it does not work that way. It is not a choice. It is not a policy position I have adopted for political reasons. It is simply the truth of who we are. We do not close the account while there is still someone out there. He looked around the room slowly. You can censure me. You can remove me from command. You cannot make me stop, because I am not the one who will stop. My species will not stop. What you are looking at is not a military operation. It is a cultural fact. The room was very quiet when he finished. Vel did not respond. She looked at the document on the table with the crossed-out names. She thought about the crowd in the docking bay that nobody had organized. She said nothing for the rest of the session. Meanwhile, in a debriefing room on the same station, Dana was sitting across from Austin and telling him everything she knew. She had spent the first 2 days sleeping, and the third day eating, and the fourth day writing. She had written 47 pages in longhand: guard rotation schedules, facility layouts, comm patterns, the names of Vreth personnel she had identified by sound and movement over 14 months, the geological details of the moon's tunnel system, and a detailed account of what the prisoners who had been held in the secondary facility had passed to her through the wall code. They had been documenting everything: guard behaviors, supply schedules, the frequency and pattern of inspection. They were not just surviving. They were collecting intelligence in the dark, on the chance that someone would come and need it. Austin read everything she had written. He did not say much while he read. When he finished, he set the pages down and looked at her. They were ready, he said. They knew someone was coming. They didn't know who or when, but they knew. She said this simply, without sentiment. We're human. It's what we do. We don't leave people in the ground. He nodded. Then he slid a map across the table. It was a new intelligence product, assembled from everything his team had gathered in both operations, cross-referenced against signals data and Vrethcom intercepts that Petra had been collecting since the first mission. 47 confirmed remaining, he said, distributed across 6 facilities. 3 on the same moon system as the first extraction, 2 deeper in Vreth space. 1, he pointed to a location near the edge of the map, here, which is a problem because that facility is inside the Vreth's inner defense perimeter. Dana looked at the map for a long time. When do we go? I need 2 more weeks. And I need you. I'm on the team. I was going to tell you that you don't have to. I'm on the team, she said again. There was nothing in her voice except certainty, clean and direct as a line drawn on paper. He did not argue. He had not expected to win that argument. Eno Ferris, in the small bunk room he had been assigned during the station stay, was writing a letter. He had started it 3 times and abandoned it 3 times, not because he did not know what to say, but because he kept saying too much. His family did not know the details of his assignment. They knew only that he was on a long deployment operation that he could not discuss. He was trying to write a letter that said I am fine and I am doing something that matters without explaining why he thought it mattered or where he had been. He ended up writing something short. He said that he had seen things on this mission that he would tell them about when he came home. He said the people he worked with were good people. He said he was not afraid. This last part was not entirely true, but it was true enough. He sealed the letter and queued it for transmission. Then he went to find Austin to ask about the plan for the second run. Across the station, in a private comm room, Warden Greth was speaking with a contact in the Vreth Dominion's intelligence division. The contact's name is not relevant. What was relevant was the conversation. The Council is formally denying involvement in the operation, the contact said. That is predictable, Greth said. They want to know your assessment of the human military's intention going forward. Greth considered this. He had been considering very little else since standing in the empty cell block. My assessment, he said carefully, is that the humans will continue until they are finished. They have, to my knowledge, never stopped a recovery operation because it was difficult or expensive or politically inconvenient. They will not start stopping now. That is not a useful answer for the Council. It is an accurate one. He paused. Tell them something else. Tell them that the humans we held, the ones we had for over a year, they were not broken. Not one of them. They were organized. They had information systems we could not decode. They had prepared for extraction even before they had any reason to believe extraction was coming. I have held prisoners from 6 different species in my career. I have never seen anything like it. He stopped. Then he said, the Council should consider that holding the remaining humans is not a strategic asset. It is a strategic liability. Because the people coming to get them do not have an upper limit on how many times they will try. The contact was quiet for a moment. You are suggesting we return them. I am suggesting the Council do whatever arithmetic makes sense to them. I am filing my observations. The conclusions are above my level. He ended the communication. He sat for a while in the quiet. Then he opened his personal log and wrote, Day 2 post-extraction. I keep returning in my mind to one detail. The sergeant, Reeves, she was the last one out of the cell block. She was counting heads as she went. She counted to 11. She looked back once. Not because she had forgotten anyone. Because she needed to be certain she had not. He closed the log. On the station, Austin's second ship was being quietly refueled. Dana, Eno, Petra, Ade, Rook, Seb, they were all there. The team had been there every day since returning, helping plan, helping train the additional personnel who would join the expanded operation. Nobody had told them to be there. They were just there, because where else would they be? There were still 47 names on the list. That was not a number any of them had agreed to live with. The refueling took 3 days. On the 4th day, before the Council's vote on formal censure was even announced, the ship departed. Drath watched it go from the window of his office. He did not smile. He did not need to. He watched until the ship was too small to see. And then he turned to his desk, where the missing persons registry waited with 47 names still uncrossed. He sat down. He opened the file. He looked at the names. Then he began planning the support network for what Austin was about to need when he came back with all of them. Because he was coming back with all of them. That had stopped being a hope. It was simply what was going to happen. It was, as Drath had told the Council, a cultural fact. The Vreth ambassador arrived at Coalition Station Reach on a ship that flew no military markings. This was significant. The Vreth did almost everything with markings, with symbols, with formal insignia that communicated rank and authority and institutional weight. A ship without markings was a ship that the sender wished to be able to formally deny. The Vreth ambassador, a senior diplomatic officer named Vel, who had spent his career specializing in the kind of conversations that did not officially happen, walked through the docking corridor with 2 aides and no armed escort, and asked to speak with the Coalition's senior delegate. Oravel received him in a small meeting room that had no windows and no recording equipment. The Vreth had requested both conditions. She had agreed, because she understood what a request like that meant. What it meant was, we want to end this quietly before it becomes something that cannot be ended quietly. Vel sat down across from her. He had the bearing of someone who had prepared very carefully for a conversation he did not want to have. The Dominion, he began, has become aware that continued detainment of human military prisoners is producing complications that outweigh any strategic value. Vel said nothing. She waited. The human recovery operations have been consistent, and persistent. He chose the word the way you choose a word when the word you actually want might start an argument. We have upgraded security protocols at 3 facilities, and the humans have adapted. We have restructured patrol patterns, and they have adapted. We have moved prisoners to deeper facilities, and they have followed. He paused. We do not have a strategic response to an adversary whose primary objective is not territorial and whose operations do not appear to be constrained by cost-benefit analysis in any way we can model. Vel said, very carefully, "What is the Dominion proposing?" "A return." He folded his hands on the table. "All remaining human prisoners, transferred to coalition custody at a neutral point, in exchange for a formal extension of the ceasefire and a mutual accord, public and binding, on the return of all military personnel from both sides who are still unaccounted for." Vel looked at him for a long moment. The humans never stopped trying to retrieve theirs. No. He met her eyes. That is somewhat the point. She thought about the crowd in the docking bay. She thought about the document with the crossed-out names. She thought about Drath saying it is simply the truth of who we are. She had spent months opposed to the recovery operations on rational grounds, legal grounds, strategic grounds, and every one of those grounds still made sense on paper, and none of them had stopped anything. "I'll need to contact Admiral Drath," she said. "The Dominion is aware that the current human recovery operation is already underway. We would ask that the teams be informed of this agreement and recalled before any further." "I'll contact Drath immediately," Vel said again. "But I cannot speak to the operational timeline." This was true. She could not speak to it, because nobody could speak to it, because the ship was already deep in Vreth space, and the only way to reach it was through a relay that would take hours. By the time the message arrived, Austin's team would already be in the middle of whatever they were in the middle of. This was, she reflected, entirely consistent with the pattern she had been observing for the past several months. The message was sent. It traveled through the relay at the speed that messages travel, which is fast but not immediate, and it found the ship's comm system at the worst possible moment, which was to say, the moment when Austin's team was 6 minutes into a 4-facility simultaneous extraction spread across 3 ships, with 47 people to recover and a guard schedule that had been upgraded twice since their last intelligence briefing. Petra received the message. She read it once. She thought about telling Austin. She looked at the tactical display showing 3 simultaneous entry operations in progress and decided that telling Austin in the next 6 minutes would not help and might hurt. She flagged the message as received and archived it for immediate review upon extraction. Then she went back to coordinating the communications between 3 teams operating in different tunnels under the same moon system. What followed was 3 hours that none of the participants later described in detail in any official account. Not because it went badly. It did not go badly, not in the final measure of things, but because the details were numerous and fast, and some of them were very close calls and the kind of closeness that makes a person go quiet when they try to talk about it afterward. There were 47 prisoners across 4 facilities on 3 bodies of rock. The 4th facility, the one inside the Vreth inner perimeter that Austin had marked on the map and called a problem, had been the hardest to plan for and proved to be the hardest in practice. The team assigned to it lost their primary entry point to a newly installed sensor grid and had to go in through a secondary access that Rook had identified as a possibility and nobody had loved as a plan. The secondary access worked. It worked because Rook had spent 6 days studying the rock composition of that moon and had correctly calculated that the construction crew had taken shortcuts on the secondary maintenance shafts that left them ungated on the interior. Rook was modest about this afterward. He said he had simply done the math. Eno said the math was brilliant. Rook said math was math. Eno said some people's math was more math than other people's math. Rook did not know what to do with this, so he said nothing. What mattered was that when the alarm sounded at the 4th facility, and it did sound, at minute 32, 1 minute before the last 2 prisoners were clear of the block, the response team that arrived found empty corridors and a hatch that had been sealed from the outside. All 3 ships reached the extraction rendezvous. The count was performed by Dana, who had insisted on being on the coordination ship specifically so that she could perform this count, and who performed it the way she performed everything, carefully, twice, without any expression on her face until she was certain. 47, 47, 47. She said the number out loud to Austin. He nodded. She hit him once in the arm, not hard, just hard enough to be clear about something. He accepted this without comment, which was the correct response. Then Petra told them about the message. Austin read it. He read it standing in the middle of the corridor with people moving around him. He read it a second time. Then he looked at Dana. They offered a deal, he said. While we were already in there, she said. Yes. She considered this. Did the deal say anything about the ones we were currently getting? The deal was for all remaining prisoners. We just got all remaining prisoners. She thought about it for another moment. Then she said, good timing. Extremely. Paul told a joke. It was bad. It was very bad. Cass, whose ankle had healed badly and would need real medical attention when they reached the station, laughed until she had to hold her side. The laughter moved through the bay. Greth, back in his office on the moon, received the official notification that the human recovery operation had concluded simultaneous to the Dominion's formal prisoner return agreement. He read the timing. He sat with it. He opened his personal log. He had been writing in it every few days since the first extraction. He looked at the last entry, then began a new one. All human prisoners have been returned. The recovery operation concluded within hours of the diplomatic agreement, effectively rendering the agreement a formality that documented something that was already happening. I have been thinking about this for the past several hours, and I keep arriving at the same place. The humans did not wait for a deal because they were not waiting for a deal. They were not operating on diplomatic time. They were operating on their own time, which is apparently a different thing entirely. He stopped. Started again. I spent 14 months believing that patience was our advantage. We had the peace agreement, the political cover, the legal standing. They had none of those things. I now believe I misunderstood what an advantage was. Our advantages were all external. Theirs was internal. They simply did not accept the premise that the situation was unresolvable. That is, I think, the thing I most failed to understand. He closed the log. He poured himself a drink that his species used for moments of significant thought and stood at his window looking at the surface of the moon. Somewhere above him, 3 ships were climbing toward the stars. At Coalition Station Reach, Oravel received the confirmation of the extraction at the same time as the confirmation of the Dominion signed agreement. She sat at her desk and looked at both documents side by side for a long time. Then she began writing her report to the full council. She had been composing this report in her head for several weeks, adjusting it as events changed, and now she knew what it needed to say. She wrote for 2 hours. The final paragraph took the longest. It read, I opposed Operation Homecoming on legal and strategic grounds. Those grounds remain legally and strategically valid. They were simply insufficient. The humans did not violate the spirit of the ceasefire. They operated from a principle that was, in retrospect, entirely consistent and entirely announced. They told us, from the beginning, that they would bring back every soldier on their missing list. They said it openly, and they meant it completely, and the council chose to treat this as rhetoric. It was not rhetoric. It was a policy, and they executed it. The lesson I take from this is not about military operations or diplomatic frameworks. It is simpler. When humans tell you what they are going to do, believe them. She submitted the report. Then she closed her workstation and went to the docking bay. She arrived 2 hours before the ships did. She waited. She was still there when the ramp came down. The last one off the 3rd ship was Dana Reeves. She walked down the ramp in the same way she had walked out of the cell block on that moon 11 extractions ago, last, counting, making sure. She reached the bottom and stood in the light of the docking bay and looked around at the faces of the crowd that had gathered again, just as it had gathered before, with no announcement and no organization. She saw Vel standing at the edge of the crowd. The 2 women looked at each other across the bay. Dana gave her a single nod. Vel returned it. Somewhere in the station's records office, a clerk updated the missing persons registry. 159 lines. Every one of them now carried a notation, returned. The clerk printed a clean copy, looked at it for a moment, and pinned it to the board above his desk. The old copy, the one with the names and the dates and the status column that had read missing for so long, he did not throw away. He folded it carefully and put it in a folder that he labeled, in his own handwriting, simply, accounted for. He did not know that anyone would ever look at that folder. He filed it properly anyway, because that was what you did with a thing like this. You made a record. You kept it. Austin was the last off his ship. He stood at the bottom of the ramp and looked at the bay, at the people, at the noise and warmth of it. He was tired in a way that went deep, the kind of tired that would take a long time to address, and that he was not going to address today. Today he was going to stand here for a few minutes and let it be over. Over. Just finished. Just done. Dana appeared at his side. They stood together without speaking for a while. "The list," she said eventually. "It's empty." She nodded once. And then, because she was Dana Reeves and she had been counting for 481 days before anyone came, and she understood better than most people what zero meant when applied to a missing list, she closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them. "Good," she said. And that was all. That was everything. Not one left behind. Humanity had said so from the beginning. They had simply meant it.